Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th prompted the deadliest European conflict since World War II, as well as the most serious confrontation between Moscow and the West since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. So far, there was no sign of an end to the war. As Russia's invasion now enters its 11th month, Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared that the Kremlin is ready to negotiate with everyone involved to reach what it views as acceptable solutions for its war against Ukraine. We are ready to negotiate with all the participants in this process about some acceptable outcomes, but this is their business. It's not we who refuse negotiations, but they, Putin said in an interview with Russia 1 state TV. Russia has been attempting to resolve the Ukraine issue peacefully since 2014, but was forced to stand up for the people who live in these territories, Putin said, referring to eastern Ukraine and underlining his reasons for the invasion. When questioned if Russia is poised to cross a dangerous line against its neighbor, Putin answered it is not that dangerous and that Russia is only defending its interests. He vowed that Russian soldiers would destroy U.S. Patriot missiles headed to Ukraine. The Russian leader's remarks come after heavy Russian shelling of the Ukrainian city of Kherson on Christmas Eve, which killed at least 10 people and injured more than 50 more. On Saturday, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky called Russia an absolute evil for the deadly strikes, which he said were carried out for the sake of intimidation and pleasure. When Zelensky visited the United States on Wednesday for his first international travel since the war began in February, he and President Biden discussed what a just peace would look like. Zelensky has outlined a set of 10 conditions for achieving peace, including total Russian withdrawal from Ukrainian land. Under Ukrainian demands, this would also include a Russian pullout from the Crimean Peninsula. If Russia is sincere about ending the war, EU and US officials have shown their willingness to dialogue. Nonetheless, Putin showed no signs of wanting to end the war, claiming in his December 7th speech that Russia was prepared for a long battle. Dmitry Peskov, a Kremlin spokesman, warned the next day that Russia was committed to retaking parts of eastern and southern Ukraine that it claims to have legally annexed in September. Putin's remark regarding conversations on December 15th comes as Western diplomats worry that Moscow may be trying to buy time before launching a big fresh onslaught. According to an advisor to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, Putin needs to return to reality and recognize that it is Russia that does not want discussions. Russia single-handedly attacked Ukraine and is killing citizens, the advisor, Mikhailo Podolyak, tweeted. Russia doesn't want negotiations, but tries to avoid responsibility. In an editorial piece, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg stated that Russia hopes to freeze the war, to allow its forces to regroup, rearm, and try to launch a renewed offensive. Senior Ukrainian authorities, including Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov, have warned of a potential Russian onslaught from numerous fronts in early 2023, which might include another effort to conquer Kyiv. While Putin has met with certain EU leaders in recent months, notably French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, there have been no direct Russia-Ukrainian peace negotiations since April. Peace discussions in the early weeks of the full-scale invasion failed to produce a breakthrough. Russian troops disregarded promises, including the establishment of humanitarian corridors for safe civilian evacuations. Putin has previously stated that Russia is open to negotiations, but only on his conditions, which would include Ukraine surrendering to Moscow's demands and acknowledging Russia's annexation of 4 Ukrainian areas. With the West's support, Kyiv has made it clear that this is intolerable. Russian strikes on power plants have left millions without power, and Zelensky stated that Moscow intends to make the final days of 2022 dark and difficult. Russia has lost everything it could this year. I know darkness will not prevent us from leading the occupiers to new defeats, but we have to be ready for any scenario, he said in an evening video address. The General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces said there was still a threat of air and missile strikes on critical infrastructure across the country. According to a Facebook post, Russian troops blasted hundreds of towns and positions along the front line. Zelensky, referring to a strike on the southern city of Kherson on Saturday, that officials say killed at least 10 people, vowed, "We will find every Russian murderer." Putin accused the West of attempting to split Russia apart. I believe that we are acting in the right direction. We are defending our national interests, the interests of our citizens, our people, and we have no other choice but to protect our citizens, Putin said. Kyiv and the West argue that Putin has no justification for what they see as an imperial-style occupation campaign. It is difficult to predict the war's final outcome. However, several significant implications for Russia and its relations with Ukraine, Europe, and the United States have emerged. While the war has been a tragedy for Ukraine and Ukrainians, it has also been a disaster for Russia in terms of military, economic, and geopolitical consequences. The conflict has severely harmed Russia's military and degraded its reputation, affected the economy, and fundamentally altered Russia's geopolitical situation in Europe. It will make any short-term restoration of normalcy in U.S.-Russian ties difficult, if not impossible. Ukraine has suffered greatly as a result of Putin's war. The exact number of military and civilian casualties is unknown, but it is significant. At the end of October, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights reported that 6,500 Ukrainian civilians have been killed and another 10,000 had been injured. Those figures probably certainly understate the truth. On November 10th, U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, estimated that 40,000 civilians had died and that 100,000 Ukrainian militaries had been killed or injured. Milley also gave a similar number for Russian casualties. Furthermore, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimated that more than 7.8 million Ukrainians had sought safety outside of Ukraine. As of mid-November, the Russian attacks have resulted in an additional 6.5 million people becoming internally displaced within Ukraine. Last summer, a Ukrainian journalist predicted that following the conflict, Ukraine would see a widespread movement to cancel Russian culture, with towns and cities across the country renaming their Pushkin squares. Odessa plans to demolish the statue of Catherine the Great, the Russian queen who founded the city in 1794. Ironically, for an invasion undertaken in part in response to Kremlin concerns that Ukraine was moving away from Russia and toward the West, the war has opened previously blocked doors for Ukraine's membership in the European Union. EU officials signed agreements with Kyiv for years, notably the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement in 2014. However, EU officials avoided using terms that would give Ukraine a chance at membership. 4 months after Russia's invasion, the European Council recognized Ukraine's European outlook and granted it candidate nation status in June. Kyiv will need years to achieve EU standards, but it now has a membership prospect that it did not have for the first 30 years of post-Soviet independence. Aside from human casualties, the war has caused massive material destruction. Cost estimates for rebuilding Ukraine range from $349 billion to $750 billion, with estimates dating back to the summer. Finding those resources will be difficult, especially given that the war has caused a severe contraction in the Ukrainian economy. The World Bank forecasts the country's GDP to fall by 35% this year. All of this has, unsurprisingly, had an impact on Ukrainian perceptions. It has strengthened the Ukrainian national identity. An August study found that 85% of Ukrainians identified as citizens rather than members of a region or ethnic group, compared to 64% 6 months earlier, before Russia's invasion. The invasion also left Ukrainians with a profoundly negative image of Russia, with 92% expressing a bad attitude toward Russia and only 2% holding a good attitude. Ukrainians have made it obvious that they would resist. According to a September Gallup poll, 70% of Ukrainians are prepared to fight till victory over Russia. Despite Russian missile attacks on Ukrainian cities, 86% of respondents in a mid-October Kyiv International Institute of Sociology poll supported the conflict and opposed dialogue with Russia. It will take years, if not decades, to eradicate the wartime hostility towards Russia and Russians. Putin appears to be clinging to his wish to reclaim a portion of Ukraine that he considers historic Russian land. However, the costs for both Russia and Ukraine are mounting by the day. Let's hope this bloodbath finishes soon and both parties reach a common point.